Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for joining this session. My name's Ian. I'm a technical evangelist with AWS, actually based in the UK, and my home territory is the UK, Ireland, and Nordic region. And that's quite a good territory to have in terms of learning a little bit about how larger, more established customers make use of AWS. I think the economy in that part of Europe is a little bit more skewed towards bigger companies that have been around for a little bit longer in comparison to Israel, which from my perspective feels like more of a startup and smaller business orientated economy. So maybe I can bring to you some of the stuff that I've learnt over my year and a half at AWS from that Northern European region. And the objective for this session today really is to talk a little bit about how organizations that have been around a little bit, more established companies and governmental organizations are making use of AWS. And more importantly than that, maybe, to talk about some of the changes in business architecture and organizational thinking that are required in order to make this transition to the cloud a successful one for your organization. Okay, so that's what I'm going to try and cover in this session today. Before we start, I think this is quite an interesting point about AWS actually. You'll sometimes hear the industry and cloud providers more generally actually talking about terms like infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. So maybe the first thing that I want to say in this session is to try and forget about that, okay? If you're thinking about using the cloud, try and think about the outcomes that your organization is trying to achieve by making use of this technology, by getting on board with this technological change. My experience is that generally leads to more successful attainment of those outcomes. It's kind of hard to hit a goal if you don't know what the goal is when you start. And I would encourage you to stop thinking about a sort of provider-centric view of the world, which is, you know, you don't get up in the morning and think, I wish to go out and buy some infrastructure as a service. You probably get up in the morning and think, I'd like to improve the efficiency with which I operate my technology, or I'd like to improve my organization's ability to innovate, deliver new products and services to stakeholders in the public sector maybe, or customers, internal or external, if you're operating in a commercial enterprise. So just try and let go of that thinking which is all about the tech and think a little bit more about the outcomes that you're trying to get to. I think that's a very good place to start as a sort of first step that you're going to take on this journey towards the cloud. Now, looking at IT today, we tend to see that IT organizations are quite traditional in their thinking. They've normally got business architectures and organizational models that are relatively siloed, and often they're organized like this, where they structure their IT around particular activities that the resources, the people in that organization are involved in. And I think most IT organizations actually are a little bit like icebergs. I know we're far from the North Pole today, but a little bit like icebergs in the sense that much of what IT does is hidden from stakeholders. It's like the stuff that's below the waterline in a massive iceberg, where you've got maybe 25 to 30% of the structure visible and the rest of it is sunken. And the stuff that's sunken is stuff like operating your infrastructure, operating the lower level components of applications that are actually mostly invisible to customers and mostly invisible to internal stakeholders. And one of the things that you can do by starting to make use of the AWS cloud is you can start to offload some of those activities that are non-value adding, some of those activities that don't actually provide you and your organization with that much differentiation. It's kind of the necessary evil of operating technology, the fact that you have to do a lot of things, you call it things like keep the lights on, you know, or running the plumbing. It kind of the language itself tends towards the sort of non-differentiated nature of the task in hand, right? It's stuff that actually you don't want to be doing. Doing the plumbing and keeping the lights on is, in most part, dirty, unglamorous work that we think people should try and avoid. Try and focus your efforts on things that really do differentiate your organization. And later on we'll talk in this session about alignment with different functions in businesses and steps you can take to try and demonstrate that using the cloud is aligned to the different objectives that different stakeholders might have in your business. But first point to make probably is try to avoid doing things that aren't differentiated. And this is something actually that Amazon more generally had really at its core when we started thinking about creating and launching AWS over 10 years ago now. We started with the inception of these services. I don't know, who here has heard of something called Amazon leadership principles? Is anyone? There's some Amazon guys in the room surely that have heard of Amazon leadership principles. You definitely have, Declan. Okay, so Amazon leadership principles, they're the behaviors that we use to guide the way in which we operate our business, okay? And we've got 14 of them. You can Google them, you can find them on the Amazon website. Interestingly enough, on the Amazon website, they're in a part of the website that's about recruitment, okay? And the reason they're in the part of the website that's about recruitment is when we're hiring people into Amazon, these are the characteristics that we assess them on. Have they previously demonstrated, the top of the list is customer obsession. So have they previously demonstrated in other roles what we would consider customer obsessed behavior, putting the customer before themselves, putting the customer actually in front of the organization that they work for to make sure that the customer gets the right outcomes. There are a lot of other things there as well: dive deep, invent and simplify, frugality, 13 other principles that we look for. And actually, thinking about customer obsession is a good way to think about the visible parts of your IT, okay? If the part of your IT is not visible to the customer, it doesn't help you towards servicing the customer more effectively, internally or externally, there's a fair chance that it's something that you should be trying to de-emphasize, something that you should be trying to spend less time on, so that you can refocus those resources onto activities that do really demonstrate that and do really add value to your organization by improving those relationships with customers. So, mapping AWS services onto this landscape, this is the generics you'll see here, just the kind of names of the functions, the names of the technology components that are present in this hypothetical organizational model. And then if we map AWS services onto this, you'll see that we've actually got very good coverage today of services that cover a wide variety of different components in this architectural map, okay? And that's come about not overnight, but over an extended period of time, working with this mindset that I've just described, to try to identify areas where we could deliver services that would make things easier for you, the customers that we want to be working with, okay? And what we've done over time is filled out the model with a wide variety of different AWS services that are applicable to all sorts of parts of the IT landscape. It's no longer just the utility computing resources of EC2 or the storage service S3 and EBS that we created all those years ago. It's now a much more comprehensive set of services that allow you to change the way that you do things all over your architecture and to step away from this undifferentiated heavy lifting of operating these low-level platform components all over the map, from things like end-user computing with Amazon workspaces through to business application deployment with services like AWS Elastic Beanstalk. They're all offering you opportunities to stop doing things that are less differentiating, free up resources, and spend those resources on things that are going to make more of a difference to your organization. That's what we're trying to do over time. And you'll also, I hope, have heard in this morning's session and continue to hear in other sessions today that AWS, Amazon more generally, but AWS specifically, it's an organization that's highly orientated around feedback. So I would ask you maybe, if you think there's something that we're not doing today which is inhibiting your adoption of this platform inside your business, then don't be silent. Please let us know how we can improve the services that we've got so we can build things that continue to have relevance to you. And critically importantly, if we've got gaps, we're not doing something today that you think would really help you, please tell us about that. Most of the services that you can see on here have come directly from conversations like that with customers, where customers have come to us and said, it would be good if you could, AWS, do this. Encryption key management's quite a recent one with that KMS service that Werner touched upon in the keynote. It's something that came directly from customers saying, we'd like you to make it easier for us to manage encryption keys and to provide audit and repudiation or rotation of keys. Please can you help us with that, AWS? And that's something we've been able to create. Seeing adoption now across a range of different customers that want to solve that pain point, get away from key management and turn that into something which is delivered as a service inside their enterprise by AWS rather than something that they have to spend a lot of time focusing on. So we're all over that map. This stuff up here I think is quite interesting at the top. This is relatively new for us, where we're looking at these end-user computing services and about really how we can change the way in which you manage the computing services that you provide for individual users in your organization. You're probably familiar with workspaces, which is a desktop computing environment delivered in the cloud. So you're simply creating workspaces for your users. They download a lightweight client that they run on their laptop or desktop. And once they've done that, they can access a full Windows 2013 service experience on the client, delivered remotely, okay? And we've done the same thing quite recently with email with Amazon Workmail to try to simplify the process of creating email services for end users as well. So we're trying to move that innovation across the map and make sure that you guys are served, your customers are served where you need to serve them. Okay. Just talking quickly about adoption. You've heard a little bit about adoption amongst enterprises in this morning's keynote. I just wanted to just draw out I think the diversity of use cases that's present in these organizations is very, very high, from customers like the ones that Werner closed upon that are going for this cloud first or all-in strategy where they're migrating their entire data center infrastructure, all of their IT applications into the AWS platform. And a good example of that, I think the customer that Werner didn't mention in this morning's session is Dow Jones and News Corporation. So they're very large global media publishing organization, obviously operating newspapers and online services across the world today, certainly with some very big media properties in North America and in the UK. And they're in the process right now of migrating more than 50 of their data centers to the AWS cloud. So it's wholesale migration of business applications, over 3,000 different apps, supporting everything from their digital media publishing platforms, so how do they actually distribute their content to customers on mobile devices or on the web, right the way through to CMS systems that might be used, if you want, in the manufacturing process for these articles, for this news content, to video asset management, to their business applications like ERP, payroll, and HR systems. The whole swathe of IT has been migrated across to AWS. And what I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes is strategies that organizations like News Corporation and Dow Jones have adopted in order to make that transition a reality, in order to actually execute the actions that are required to make that change inside their company. How have they changed their thinking? What have they focused on? What have they spent their time doing? And how has that made that journey a reality for that particular customer? But we've got many other examples here in pharmaceuticals with Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb and Novartis, for example, or in travel with Qantas, who've begun to transform their IT using the AWS cloud, starting out with new applications, for example, for hotel bookings, and moving on to move some of their cabin service applications and now more substantive parts of their internal IT platform being moved onto the AWS platform. So we've got very good referenceability. If you want to learn more about these and other customers that are using AWS, every single logo that you can see here is written up or available in the form of a video case study on the AWS website. So there's either a several-page write-up or a 2 to 3, maybe 5-minute long video summarizing exactly what the customer's use case is. So what I would encourage you to do after today maybe is to go and take a look at the references, the case studies part of the AWS site, and identify case studies or references that are in the same industry that you operate in. And we found that a very useful way for individuals that are interested in encouraging, convincing their organization to adopt the cloud, going to your CEO or to another influential individual, another influential stakeholder in your business with a real piece of collateral, a real asset, which talks about how an existing customer in a similar sector or the same sector has made this change and what some of the benefits are that they've driven, can be a really, really powerful tool. For example, if you were going to jump onto that site and look for Dole Foods, which you can see here, they produce, as you probably know, fruit juices and canned fruit products. They did something relatively simple. They moved their global SharePoint environment to AWS, so migrating an existing Microsoft application out of their own data centers into the AWS cloud, and they quantified the benefits from doing that as the $350,000 a year in savings. And there's an IT director from Dole available to watch and read a commentary from on the AWS website talking about precisely what they achieved and how they achieved it. So that's one example of one of those case studies. And this is not just in the commercial segment. We also have good penetration and a good track record actually in aiding public sector bodies around the world in changing the way in which they deliver services for their stakeholders and of course their customers, who are quite often the citizens of the countries within which they operate, public bodies all over the world making use of AWS. One very good example, which is very local to me, know what your state broadcast situation is like here in Israel, but in the UK we have the BBC, obviously very well known globally. They have an on-demand video service called BBC iPlayer. It's one of the first to launch worldwide, and each day where they've transformed their content creation and transcoding pipeline using AWS. Each day they ingest 21 terabytes of video content, process that, and make it available for play out on all of the different device platforms that they support. So they completely changed the way in which they meet their content accessibility obligation under the public service charter that they operate under in the UK. And they've also really managed to attack their cost base and help drive the UK government's cost efficiency agenda as well by making use of that service. That's one example in a public body that we've got some track record with. Okay, so that's some credentials. How about getting there? You know, what do you do to get there? How do you achieve this goal of gaining this efficiency gain and freeing up these resources to make them available excuse me, to focus on the outcomes that really matter to your organization? What are the tangible changes or steps that you can take in order to do that? Of course, this is a journey, so it's not something that happens overnight. You can't flick a switch on, you know, Tuesday morning and Tuesday afternoon you're operating inside the AWS cloud. If only things were that simple, you know. Unfortunately, one of the reasons enterprise IT is quite hard to change is because it's been around a long time. You've got a classic business change challenge that you need to deal with, as well as a technology change issue that you've got to deal with. The lady over here nodding her head, I think she's kind of been there and felt that, right? So you've got a lot of stuff that you need to do. What I want to do now in the second half of this talk really is share some experience of things that we've seen. Okay, each journey, of course, is unique in its own right, but there's some common themes that come out when we're talking to customers that have made this journey. 3 of those themes are about what I might call the setup, you know, getting your organization motivated to want to make this change. How do you do that? Well, there's executive sponsorship, which often as a precursor requires executive engagement. There's education, actually throughout all levels of the organization. And often there's an experimental phase where you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the technology, and quite rightly, you're going to want to prove to yourself that the platform, the services that we provide work the way that we say they do. You know, we wouldn't expect you to take it on face value. Obviously, we've got referenceability, but the vast majority of customers, despite that referenceability, you're not going to dive headlong into the pool. You know, they want to know how deep the water is and what the temperature's like before they do that. And obviously, proof of concepts, pilots and experimentation, biting off a little bit as a little taster, a very, very important way of doing that. Okay. So once you've got those setup phase completed, and we'll talk about those in more detail in a couple of minutes, there's then some actions that you need to take in order to implement this, in order to make it reality. That might be partner engagement, might be creating something that we call a Cloud Center of Excellence, which I'm going to talk about in some detail. And that is a model that's been very successful for some of the more some of the more substantial organizations that have moved to AWS, having this center of expertise where they collect together cloud expertise inside the organization. It's capable of acting as obviously as a center of excellence, but as a center of consulting expertise within the organization. It can be very helpful if you've got a very large business with either federated or distributed organizational units. You want to try and coordinate things. You want to try and do that in a way which is efficient, where you're not duplicating effort inside every business unit that wants to make this journey. And certainly you're able to, you know, at the very worst, learn from your own mistakes across the full breadth of your organization. But even better than that, how about learning from other people's, you know, bringing that expertise of what's gone wrong and right for other companies that might have made this journey, and having a place inside the organization where you can go for that. It's actually a very valuable approach. Then a phase potentially of hybrid adoption, which again we're going to cover in a little bit more detail, but this is a period, as Werner said, where your organization has some services or applications running in the cloud and some running on premises, or maybe beyond that, services and applications that span both of those environments, where you might have data sources on premises with application server resources in the cloud. You might have data pipelines or data workflows that span on-premises resources and AWS cloud computing resources, and you want to integrate those things together. And we'll talk later about tooling for that and how you can achieve that. And then lastly, a cloud-first standard, something that we've seen as the end state for many organizations that have been on this journey. When implementing new services or new applications, it's not a question of, should I put this in the cloud? It's a question of, why wouldn't I? put this in the cloud. You've established that this is the best operating model, offers the highest agility, the lowest cost structure, the best security, and then it becomes a standard. And anybody that doesn't want to use the cloud technology platform has to justify that decision not to use it. That's the end state that many organizations end up in. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about sponsorship and alignment. What we see here, it's obviously very, very important in large organizations to have the right sponsorship model in place. I'm sure we've all, in our careers, maybe when we were a little bit younger, certainly when I was a little bit younger, I didn't quite understand the importance of politics in business, or the importance of stakeholder management, to give it a more correct term maybe, and had great ideas, which I was absolutely convinced were great ideas, and I could never get them implemented because I'd never focused on this. Smiling again down here, it's been there. So never focused on this important phase of getting the right stakeholders on board and getting those stakeholders aligned behind your objective, so you can work this path of least resistance. Okay, and often when engaging these stakeholders, what do senior business leaders look for? They look for ROI and risk, balancing those two things. So don't bet the farm. It's another way of saying manage your risk profile in the early days and make sure that you're able to satisfy your stakeholders, that you're not going to leave them in a position where the organization or they as individuals feel like they're carrying an excessive risk profile. Okay, that's very, very important. Politics I touched upon. Now this can start anywhere. It's quite an important point. So we've seen very, very successful AWS adoption projects that have actually started at the bottom, and you've had developers experimenting with services, and as long as they do that in a way which has an eye to the risk profile of the organization, they're cognizant, aware of the information security policies that apply, they're able to demonstrate and claim success with quite small initiatives. And you can genuinely have a bottom-up model with this kind of initiative if you do that, as long as it's managed in a way that prevents the door being slammed in people's faces in those early days. Okay, so it's not to say that it always has to be CEO down. You can go up, but you have to bear these characteristics in mind when doing that. So I would talk about alignment. This is super important, and you'll find actually that the benefits of the AWS cloud are well distributed across different stakeholder objectives. So pick a few examples. CEOs, okay, they're looking to competitive advantage and they're looking to efficiency in many cases. How can they, if not save money, make sure that money that they do spend is highly targeted on those customer-obsessed initiatives, things that are really going to make a difference to the organization that they lead and represent, okay? So you can bear those characteristics in mind. Stopping doing things, as long as you can demonstrate diversion of those resources that you've saved back onto things that give the CEO an edge, make his business more competitive, you're likely to find that a kind of easy battle to have, an easy discussion to have. CIOs, I think recently what we've seen is ubiquity of realization that the main role of the CIO is to align business and technology and make sure that what technology organizations deliver is aligned to the goals of the business and helps the business achieve its goals. So quite often CIOs can be influenced to be positively inclined towards adoption of AWS if you can demonstrate that ability to improve alignment. And again, some of this can be about diverting resources away from things that aren't differentiating. They also, and you'll find technology leaders, they're often very interested in being able to demonstrate that they can make the business move fast. You know, they can inject technology to give the business agility or the ability to accelerate, maybe scale up, enter new markets or launch new products more quickly. And I quite often find senior IT leaders are very interested in demonstrating that ability to drive efficiencies and scale fast. The CFO, it's cash flow, but it's also ROI. So they want to demonstrate cost savings, but also the ability to generate a better return off capital in future than they might have done historically. Okay, so there's kind of two, I wouldn't say slightly conflicting, two associated objectives that you're likely to find in the CFO. Marketing, products and marketing maybe would be a more appropriate title here. If you consider the CMO is quite often the owner of products, they want to be able to respond to market changes. You see a big trend today for data-driven marketing where metrics in everything, tracking of everything, instrumentation of everything is something that CMOs are becoming very, very attuned to, very, very aligned to. And the cloud can be a good enabler for that, of course, helping you deal with larger quantities of data and more diverse data more easily. And we'll talk maybe later on about examples of tools that you can use to quickly inject or add analytics services into your organization in a very, very quick and frictionless manner using AWS. Again, that can be something that is a really hot topic for marketeers. CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, may think, you know, the kind of people that would be sitting like this when you talk to them about the cloud. See quite a lot of that from InfoSec professionals sometimes, but I've obviously been in a lot of conversations like that, and I think it's a natural tendency of information security. You know, ignorance is no excuse in IS, right? They have to know. So they want to be able to demonstrate they've got visibility, control, and auditability of any services that are deployed, whether those are in an on-premises environment or in a cloud environment in the AWS cloud. Thankfully, you'll find actually that it's actually probably easier to establish visibility, control, and audit over services that are inside AWS than it is to do that with services that are deployed on premises. It's kind of counterintuitive. I was in a session with a very large multinational investment bank in London shortly after I joined AWS, so about 14 months ago, in Canary Wharf, which is the big financial district in the East End of London. And I was talking to a bunch of information security pros, and they were actually, when I came into the room, they were actually sitting like this. You know, so I knew I was in for a good session. And when I started talking to them about what they could do with AWS, there were a few things that really made them very interested in using the cloud. One was the fact that you're starting with a completely blank sheet of paper. Okay? So when you start using AWS, if you're a new user, you will have nothing, no resources, no VPCs, that's no networks laid out, no gateways, no instances, absolutely nothing. But what you do have in your mind, of course, is you have, you know, in my case, coming up to 20 years of IT experience. In the case of some InfoSec pros, maybe 30 or 40 years of information security practice expertise. And what can you do with that if you've got a blank sheet of paper? Well, you can kind of dump all of that accumulated good practice into a perfect architecture. So you really do have an opportunity to build from scratch inside the cloud and bring with you everything that you've learned about how to do the security architecture properly, in quotes, okay? And the great thing about it is if you do it wrong, you can tear up your cloud environment because you've not got anything physical, and you can recreate it the next day. And you can do that again and again and again and again and just keep iterating until you've got an architecture which you feel is robust. And at that point, you can start to deploy services into it. So it's very different to traditional on-premises resources where, you know, you might make a buying decision about how many firewalls, switches, routers, traffic managers, IDS or IPS systems you need, and then you're fixed with that architecture for 3 or 5 years while you depreciate it. Okay? So that's the problem with on-premises IT. It's actually very inflexible. Once you've bought it, you have it, right? It's there, and you've got to justify getting rid of it or changing it. Sometimes you go to finance and ask to do that, and it's not a very easy conversation, right? So the beauty of the cloud is you can just rip it up and recreate it. And then we've got auditing and visibility controls. So you might have heard Werner mention briefly during the keynote a service called CloudTrail. Okay? Allows you to turn on auditing on your AWS environment, and it's API level auditing. So you can see at a glance every single action that's ever been executed against your account. Every resource that's ever been created, modified, or destroyed is visible there in a log. Again, very difficult to do this with on-premises resources where you might have 5, 10, or even 20 different management systems that you're using to manage different parts of your architecture. Where do you go for a single view of everything that's happened? So it's quite difficult to do that, right? With the cloud, you can collect that auditing data in one location, and then you can apply intelligence tools to it. There's a partner here called Sumo Logic today. If you've got 5 minutes in the break, go and check out their CloudTrail console demo, which will show you real-time auditing of API requests into your AWS account or their AWS account, and you can see precisely who's doing what in real time to any of your services. So that's the second thing. And then thirdly, identity and access management, VPC, AWS config, additional services that you can use to further enhance role separation, build network topologies that suit your use case or security controls that you want to implement, and monitor individual resources for changes proactively. So maybe you want to be notified if anyone makes a change to the routing table inside your VPC, because that will change the way in which traffic flows around between different components that you might have. You could set up a rule in AWS config to notify you about any changes to that particular resource. Again, it's stuff that it's quite difficult to do on premises. And we think that by combining these different features together, and of course, including your CISO and the security information management team in the education process about the cloud, you can bring them along. And actually, most CISOs, when they know how AWS works and what it is, will be as comfortable, if not more comfortable, than they are with on-premises infrastructure. Okay, spent quite a lot of time on security there, but it's a very, very important area. And then in revenue or in sales, obviously they're interested in getting products to market quickly. Maybe you are a technology business and you want to deliver products on the AWS platform so you can scale to access markets globally or just serve more customers with less investment more quickly than you might have been able to do previously. These are all topics that you're going to find revenue officers and sales directors are very, very interested in. Okay? Yes?
I have a question. How do you refer to comparing open source technologies like OpenStack and Cloud Foundry?
Okay, so the question was, how do we compare open source technologies like OpenStack and Cloud Foundry with AWS? Well, to answer your question in two ways, with Cloud Foundry and actually other software products like that, AWS can be a deployment platform. So you could quite easily run the Cloud Foundry stack on top of AWS, and there are many people that do that, including Cloud Foundry themselves. Their service runs on the AWS platform, and they've been quite open about that. That's in the public domain. As far as OpenStack, well, it's not just OpenStack actually, it's private infrastructure of any type. What are the issues with private infrastructure? Well, first of all, you have to know you need it, okay? And I'll come back to that in a second. Secondly, you have to budget for it. Then you have to decide you're going to buy it. Then you have to procure it. Then you're going to have to have it delivered, implement it, install it, test it, configure it, and then you can start using it, okay? So the first issue is it's very slow to do that. It takes a long time. The second issue is once you've done that, you've fixed your cost profile for the next 3 or 5 years at whatever the depreciation level for that asset is. It will gradually decline. Every month you'll have a depreciation line in your books. What happens if that product's unsuccessful or that market entry turns out to be not as great as you thought it was going to be, or maybe it turns out to be better than you thought it was going to be and you need way more capacity? Then you've immediately got one of two issues: the capital write-down, or you've got to buy more stuff and wait again for it, okay? So our contention is it's not OpenStack or any other stack, it's just infrastructure that you have to own has inherent disadvantages within it, okay? And if you can avoid those disadvantages, it's going to be better if you do that, okay? So does that answer your question? Yeah. Good stuff. So what do we do? Yeah. So next thing to talk about is education. Okay. And this is linked really to making it real, because you need education in order to do things. You need to have expert resources, in all parts of your organization, from analysis through architecture, through implementation, maybe developers. You want to programmatically control the platform or build apps that use AWS services directly. And there are a few ways you can do that. Okay. One of those is to use partners. Another way is to invest in your own organization's skills through education or through some sort of knowledge transfer process that you might do with partners. We're going to come back and talk about those options a little bit later on, but there's definitely an education requirement, and it's at all levels. And what I would say is, you might be the only person at this event today from your organization, or you might be part of a small crew of individuals in your company or public sector entity that are interested in making use of the cloud. I would say go broad, Make sure that everybody's got every opportunity to educate themselves about how the cloud might make your organization more efficient, how they might make use of this technology platform in their particular roles. We've got lots of resources that you can make use of. Live events like this, really big events like AWS reInvent that we run every year, which actually has a dedicated CIO summit for the largest users of IT around the world to come and hear from our executive team about what AWS has done and is going to do in the future. And also we have lots of online options and other training options that you can take advantage of in order to spread AWS knowledge around inside your company or public sector entity. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the session, but the one takeaway really is just go broad with education. Don't restrict it, okay? It's actually a good opportunity for people that have AWS skills. This is job trends measured over the course of since 2006, so the last 9 years, okay? This is jobs that list AWS or Amazon Web Services as a key expertise area. Okay, you can see that we were, down at the single-digit % level of roles that were asking for that type of expertise, that particular skill set, back in 2006. We're just hitting 20% now, so almost 1 in 5 technology jobs are listing AWS expertise as an important prerequisite for those roles. Okay, so I mean that's an indicator of 2 things. First of all, that cloud is really going mainstream, and that many IT jobs now require cloud expertise or a component of AWS cloud expertise in order for you to be successful in them. Secondly, it's a great indicator for people that have these skills, because maybe you're an individual contractor just in the room because you're interested in learning a little bit about enterprise adoption. Is anybody in that state? Is anyone an individual consultant working on AWS services in here? Maybe those guys are all in the tech tracks. What I would say is, there's a great opportunity to form a business around AWS as a consultant. There's a great opportunity as an individual for skills portability, for moving between organizations, ensuring that you're being rewarded fairly and adequately for the expertise that you have and the skills that you bring to the role that you're undertaking. And also there's some labor security there for people that have these skills. So it's often the case that if you're offering to train even technology staff that might be at day one a little bit resistant to using the cloud, there's often a benefits case for the individuals for taking on this training. It will make their skills more portable, and in a time of change in IT, can be somewhat of a safety net for individuals to have these skills. So I would really encourage you to sort of present it in that way. Here's a little bit more about those training offerings that I talked about. So actually got training that AWS provides for business stakeholders. So if you've got business stakeholders, business analysts, financial staff, business unit owners even, that want to learn more about the benefits of using the cloud and how specific AWS services and AWS architectural approaches can help businesses achieve some of those outcomes that we talked about. We have something called Business Essentials, which is a 1-day training course intended for business pros to explain to them a little bit more about the benefits of using the cloud. It's like using the cloud. It's like a much longer version of the session that we're doing today. Similarly, for technical staff, we've got lots of courseware here, both an Essentials course, which is like day one, where you will be immersed in AWS services and learn some of the principles, right the way through to associate and advanced classes for developers, architects, DevOps professionals, and systems operations professionals, a specialty course on big data analytics, and we've also got training available across a variety of different channels, from online videos and labs and also free webinars through to classroom-based instructor-led courses delivered by AWS and by partners. And actually for larger companies, say you've got a team of 10 plus people that want to be trained, can also develop customized education delivery programs for large entities. It's a very cost-efficient way of getting tailored training that can help your organization really ramp up quickly and develop a lot of AWS skills very fast. And we've offered that both to enterprise organizations, to end users, but also to AWS consulting partners. And in the second case, phenomenally high scale, numbers of individuals being trained in some consulting partners that will blow your mind if you knew what they were. It's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. Okay, so experimentation. This is a very interesting area in my view. The reason for that is the first steps that you take with the cloud. There's a lot of different options available to you, and we see customers tackling this in a very different way, very many different ways. It's quite common to start with non-production workloads. So it might be development and test of new applications. It might even be regression testing for new versions of existing apps that you have. And there's a few reasons that the cloud is a very good target for this kind of workload. One is to do, back to the question we answered earlier here, to do with speed. You might just want to quickly try something out. Maybe you want to talk about BI. Maybe you want to try out some new business intelligence tools, okay? You want to run a new analytics process inside your organization. Maybe work on analyzing customer lifetime value or seeing trends in churn if you're operating in the telecom segment, like we heard a little bit earlier from one of the speakers. You can inject a service like Amazon Redshift, our petabyte scale data warehouse. You can create a cluster in about 10 minutes, okay? Presents you with a standard ODBC or JDBC endpoint, okay? So you can load your data into that using existing ETL tools that you might have, or you can bulk load it directly from Amazon S3 using some direct copy commands for high speed if you've got a large data set. You've then got a data warehouse with all your data in it. Okay, it might take you an hour to do that. Then tools. You can go to the AWS Marketplace, which is a marketplace for ISVs that want to sell software products on the AWS platform. You can pick 4 different query tools: Tableau, Jaspersoft, it's TIBCO Jaspersoft now, Pentaho, maybe another one. There's quite a lot on there. Create all of those different environments in parallel, use them all against your data set, and then when you're finished, just discard them. The warehouse, the instances that are running the query environments, and the query software. It'll cost you, I'd say, less than $100 to go through that process. It'll take you less than a day to set up the warehouse and a little bit of time to play around with the tools. But you're paying for the query tools by the hour for the software licenses in the same way that you're paying for the infrastructure they run on by the hour. It's just a completely new way to experiment with new functionality and test new software that you might not have used before. But once again, it's very difficult to achieve that with on-premises infrastructure, where you might have to enter into a contract or an evaluation agreement with a software provider to even get a license to install on your premises so you can test their data warehouse. We just don't have that. It's totally different, okay? So that's a good example of using the cloud for experimentation. And of course, there are lots of other things as well. You might experiment with mobile apps, internal corporate apps, websites. Maybe you are launching new products or experimenting with products in new markets like Unilever do. Maybe you want to run experimental product websites on AWS. They're doing brand tests all over the world for different FMCG brands that they operate. And they do this in the digital world using AWS as a platform. Or maybe it's virtual desktop experimentation. You've got temporary workers coming on board and you want to equip them with a desktop environment so they can operate. This will lead to some of your users and some of your resources migrating away from your existing data center infrastructure. Maybe you're avoiding further investment in your existing data center and moving those services into the cloud. Okay? Partner engagement. I did say I would come back to this, and I just teased at how big some of the expertise pools are in some of the partners that we have. These are some of the organizations that we work with around the world with strong AWS consulting expertise that can help organizations assess whether or not they want to migrate to the cloud and then make that a reality through the provision of expertise. And that provision of expertise can take a few different forms. I've known of situations where customers have entered into short-term consulting contracts. They've been ramped up with consulting resources, and then there's been a formal knowledge transfer process. So expertise has been transferred from the consulting partner into the entity that's going to be using the services over the long term, and they've built their own AWS Cloud Center of Excellence with the support of a consulting partner to help them do that, to help them spin up that new area of expertise. That's actually the approach that News Corporation took in the UK with their move of these 34 to 40 data centers around the world. That was achieved with the support of an AWS partner called CloudReach, one of the largest consulting partners up in the UK, and they were very successful in getting News Corporation into a position of self-sufficiency very quickly. Okay? And then you've got other models, managed services models, or even more traditional outsourcing models, where you're entering into a long-term outsourcing contract with CSC or Accenture, but they're delivering to you the benefits of efficiency and speed of building your future technology operating environment on AWS rather than on your own data center or in one of their own data centers. That, again, is a very common model for large multinational enterprises that want to make use of the cloud. Okay? So, broad partner map. And of course, here in Israel, I'm not sure on this slide, we have Cloud Zone and others operating specifically in this market. Okay? Matrix. ISVs. And we touched upon this a little bit already when we were talking about analytics products. So I mentioned a few analytics products, TIBCO, Tableau, they were two of them. Pentaho was another, I'm not sure if they're on there. So these are some of the software providers, some of the technology providers that are available through that AWS marketplace. So you can quickly and easily get access to services from these partners that you can run either in perpetuity or over the long term inside your AWS environment, or you can experiment with if you wish to do that. Okay, so I would encourage you, if you're going to deploy new software, you need an application to solve a particular business challenge, make a process more efficient, deliver some new insight, maybe launch a new product. check out the AWS Marketplace and see whether there's an option there that's available for you to at least evaluate. Like I've said, it's commitment free. You're paying for software licenses by the hour in the same way that you do the resources they run on. So you're going to lose nothing except for a few dollars if you experiment with these options. You may find that it gives you a shortcut to implementing something that might previously have taken weeks or months or even longer for you to implement inside your business. Okay, so there's a whole technology partner ecosystem there as well. And many of these partners are in the security segment, people like Alert Logic or Sumo Logic we touched upon already, helping you operate secure and compliant environments inside AWS in a more efficient and agile manner as well. So definitely check out those options. We also have something called the Cloud Adoption Framework, which is a professional services offering developed by AWS to help partners or end user customers accelerate their move into the AWS cloud. It's a kind of unusual concept. We're trying to focus on actually the minimum length of engagement time with customers to enable customers to become self-sufficient. So we're trying to do the kind of knowledge transfer that I was talking about as an example a few minutes ago, and really trying to help customers spool up, help them get that momentum and that expertise that they need in order to become self-sufficient. We have specialized practices in here looking at security, IT transformation applications. We can bring that expertise to bear that you need just to help you get started inside the cloud. Building a center of excellence, we touched upon earlier. So this is about bringing together that cloud expertise in one location inside your organization, one organizational location. This is a mechanism that we found customers see a lot of success with. Like I said earlier, we're trying to bring, yeah, go ahead.
Just a question before, slide before, if you don't mind.
This one?
About the,
This one.
yeah. When you said you have some professional services, is it on-site
Yes, yeah,
personnel
yeah.
actually helping the customer
Yes, that's right, yeah, yeah. So on-site personnel.
in each country?
Yeah, so we can deliver it locally in different locations around Europe, Middle East and Africa, yeah. Yeah, you should talk to your account manager about that if you're interested in learning more. Yeah, so what we're doing there is looking at a maturity-based model, basically assessing your organization's readiness. So consider it a readiness assessment, determining, for example, if you were an organization that had a large number of mainframe-based apps, okay, and a heavily sort of client-server orientated workflow inside your organization, in order to take advantage of the cloud, there's going to be additional steps that you need to take, right? And it's that upfront maturity assessment, basically assessing where you're at in terms of your organizational capability, the architecture that you're using, and the specific apps that you have. Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, we're getting very short on time here. I didn't actually think I was going to have enough content to fill this session, but I've got way more content than I needed to fill the session. So, on the Centre of Excellence, just quickly close up on the Centre of Excellence by saying it's bringing together that good practice into one location so it can act as an internal consulting resource and enable other parts of your organization with the expertise that they need in order to get moving. And it's much about retaining that practice, retaining that expertise, keeping those learnings so that when Business Unit 5 comes to implement the same thing that Business Units 1 and 2 have already done, they're not making the same mistakes again. Okay? Now, the end of all this, we think in most organizations, is a migration to this cloud-first model, where rather than asking, can this application go in the cloud, or should this application go in the cloud, organizations instead end up asking themselves, why shouldn't, or why can't this application go in the cloud? So that kind of model leads customers to this all-in adoption, and you've got quite a few examples here of customers that have done that, also of ISVs that have done it, technology companies that are modernizing the way in which they deliver their products, and they're doing that by taking advantage of cloud technology, the AWS cloud, as a platform upon which they'll run their products in the future. And obviously the best example of that is Infor, with their really wonderful quote about friends don't let friends build data centers. It's not a good idea to continue to invest in this fixed, static, capital-intensive and costly IT. It's a much better model to get away from that, redivert those resources onto things that really do add value for your organization, to your customers, and get away from operating old school IT, old world IT. Okay, so the last thing I've got before we close up, just to ask you something. So if you do start on this path, we'd love to know how you get on. We'd love you to talk to us throughout the process. Pick up the phone to your AWS account manager, let another member of our team know. We're always looking for customers that have had failures that we can learn from, services we might not deliver, or things we could do better, so we can optimize our business model, and we can show that we're customer obsessed by stopping other customers having those same issues in the future. So that's the first thing to say. And of course, we're always interested in successes, because we genuinely think that using the cloud is a better way to deliver IT, and we want to have the maximum amount of evidence of that. So if you do have a failure or a success, please let us know, a member of our team know, so that we can learn from that or amplify it, and other customers can learn from what you've done and had successes with. Okay, that is all I have. Thank you.